Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Maddie K, this is my big chair, and I read the entire Powerless series so you don't have to. You're welcome. Today we will be talking about the Powerless series by Lauren Roberts, and that includes the titles Powerless, Reckless, Fearless, and the novella Powerful. We're going to be talking about all four of these books today, and I do want to warn you guys there will be spoilers ahead. So if you haven't read these books and you're interested in reading them on your own time, I would invite you to sign off from this video and come back once you are finished. Also, trigger warnings for torture, war, injuries in battle, death, gory death scenes, mentions of genocide, ethnic cleansing, as well as mental health and incest. Yeah, we are going to be getting into quite a lot today, so buckle up and let's get started. Now, I already have a video out about the first book, Powerless, so if you would like a more detailed deep dive into that story, I would definitely recommend that you go watch that one, just to give you guys a bit of a heads up. Before we get into that, I do want to have a little bit of a conversation about the topic that we haven't really covered that extensively on this channel, and that topic is plagiarism, a word that has been associated with Lauren Roberts in the past. This is a very tricky subject, so I do want to talk about my personal opinion. Keep in mind, I'm not accusing Lauren Roberts of anything. I'm just talking about what other people have been bringing up or discussing on booktok or booktube and adding my own 2 cents into the conversation. You know that saying, the object in the mirror may be a lot closer than it appears? That is a sentiment I'm starting to feel about the publishing community and mainly the books that it decides to shove out onto the shelves every single year. It feels like all of these books that I'm reading are the exact same book. And I'm not just talking about fan fiction, I'm talking about traditionally published books. I'm talking about books that went through rounds and rounds of editing with the team, with the publishers. So many people had their eyes on this book and not a single person raised a red flag asking, hey, haven't we read this before? Don't you think this is a little too similar? We've seen this a lot recently with a lot of books being heavily inspired by their predecessors. For example, 50 Shades of Grey was originally fan fiction based off of Twilight that was published under a brand new title and with a few tweaks to make it not too similar to the original content. Before she wrote The Mortal Instruments, Cassandra Clare was known for her Harry Potter fanfiction, which also inspired a lot of the material and the romance for the Mortal Instruments series. And I'm not saying that fanfiction is particularly bad. In fact, it has been around for quite some time. One of the oldest examples of fanfiction that I have found was Nosferatu and Dracula. And at face value, these books are very similar. A creature of the night seduces a young fair maiden, and then her mortal paramour must step in to save her from eternal damnation. Nosferatu was published after Dracula, and a copyright claim was filed for plagiarism. Nosferatu then entered what appeared to be an eternal slumber, never to be seen again in the public eye, but ever since these two stories have become public forum, it's gained a new resurgence in modern times. The movie Nosferatu came out earlier on this year, and I'm so glad I got to witness it. However, stories like this really do call to question. Should we be looking more critically at plagiarism? Should all stories just be accepted as their own original material? Or should authors be held way more accountable to plagiarism even in the realm of fanfiction? How close is too close to the original material? And what exactly is the line between fanfiction and plagiarism? These are all questions we're going to be talking about today because we are covering the Powerless series in its entirety. And this series was written by Lauren Roberts. Now, Lauren Roberts was initially a self-published author who rose to prominence once publishers got their hands on this book. It became an instantaneous bestseller and marketed heavily on BookTok. Despite the fact that this series just came out recently within the past couple of years, a lot of people have actually claimed that books that were published earlier than Powerless were the ones plagiarizing and not Powerless itself. A lot of her fans have actually come out and accused Victoria Aveyard of plagiarizing Powerless with her Red Queen series, despite the fact that Red Queen was published in 2015 and Powerless was actually published in 2023. You do the math. Now, I guess we can critique these fans on their lack of critical thinking skills, but I think the bigger issue here is that the call is coming from inside the house. It does seem a bit hypocritical of these fans, to say the least. Even worse, that they almost seem to be projecting their own biases stories onto other books because they are ride or die for this one book in particular. It's very hard to think that you're investing your time and money on a book that is low quality, but even worse is ripping off other people's work. This has been a huge issue in the publishing industry recently, where a lot of people have been critiquing the rise of booktok and booktube for the reason why these books have become such low quality. But I don't think the consumer, who has the right to consume whatever they like, should be the one mainly at fault. I think the system is the one to blame. The publishing industry is incredibly greedy and has become very prevalent in the way that they are just, for lack of a better term, out low quality books where the pages are upside down, the spines aren't glued together properly, where there's glaring grammar errors, where the covers are weird, where they're using AI. It's very clear to me that these people are really prioritizing quantity over quality, and at the very end of the day, it all comes down to money. They see something that people like, so they're willing to buy 5, 10, 15 different books that all basically read as the same. And this book is no exception to that. And I can understand this business strategy to a certain extent. It's a lot harder and a lot more risky to gamble on brand new authors and trends rather than just give the readers what they love and appreciate that they know is incredibly profitable, rather than focusing on new ideas that could be a huge swing and a miss. They want to go with what's familiar, with what's known. And fan fiction is based off of really popular books, so why not publish those? But these fanfiction books are getting a little bit too close for comfort. And as I'm going through, and it's even gone to a point where they're literally lifting scenes, character names, and even country names from other books and then turning around and hoping that no one notices. Don't you think that avid readers would notice if one of their favorite books was being plagiarized, allegedly? And I won't go as far as to accuse Lauren Roberts of plagiarizing outright, because I don't really have a lot of evidence of that, and the term plagiarism is a bit vague. The term plagiarism is defined as taking someone else's ideas and using them as your own. And copyright claims are really hard to come by nowadays because there are so many books that are all basically the same. It would be very hard for authors to prove that someone else is lifting their work without having the cold hard evidence to prove it. And it's not like Lauren Roberts was copying and pasting scenes from Red Queen. I'm just saying some of these scenes and names and even plot lines are incredibly familiar. But I will accuse her of being what I like to call a literary pickpocket. Now, this is a term I like to use for authors who take things from other books and use them in their own. You can argue that's still technically plagiarism, but at the end of the day, there really are no original ideas anymore. The market is incredibly, and it gets to a point where even I, as someone who is an aspiring author, I have an idea in my head that I haven't shared with anyone, and then I read the exact same idea in someone else's book. I don't know the author. I seriously doubt that they would hack into my computer, despite the fact that was a bit of a paranoid thought that did come up in my mind recently. But it's very jarring to see that, because you automatically think, oh, did they steal this from me? Or do we all just have the same ideas? A big part of writing is reading, so no matter what, you are unconsciously taking on all this information and ideas, and you may even find it bleeding into your own work. I've had that happen to me a couple of times where I had random names pop up in my head, and then I typed them in, and then later on I realized, oh, that's where that name came from. I read that in this book, or I saw it in a movie or a TV show somewhere. You catch my drift. We take on so much information as human beings, sometimes we don't even realize where it's coming from. Maybe Lauren Roberts didn't intend to make it so close to Red Queen. She just wanted to write a book based off of Red Queen. There's no harm in that. I'm just saying that the publishing industry is losing a lot of its own integrity and reputation by allowing these authors to write books that are so similar to the material that they were based on. And who knows, maybe these editors and the publishers didn't read Red Queen. I'm giving these people the benefit of the doubt because I don't want to live in a world where people can plagiarize and get away with it. Call me crazy, but that's just a really difficult reality to live in. I don't want to criticize her for being too inspired by these other stories, but I will criticize her for being a little too derivative. She does nothing with the original source material. Her reiterations of these ideas and plot lines are just very contrite. There were times in the story when I was thinking to myself, oh, that's a Hunger Games reference. Oh, that's a Cinder reference. Oh, that's a Red Queen reference. If you can name the book off the top of your head that this is coming from, that might be a little too close to the original material. For this next part, as I'm reading to you these various descriptions and blurbs of these other stories that I believe Powerless is based on, I want you to listen and see if you can recognize a bit of a pattern. First example I would like to mention here is the selection by character. cast. Now the selection is about a average, ordinary young girl who is growing up in a poor part of town. She comes from very humble beginnings. The country is called Ilya, very similar to the country name in Powerless. I believe that they are spelled slightly differently, but once again, this is a very eccentric name to call a country. It's not like they were calling it, oh, the Kingdom, or North Island, or the Southern Isles, anything like that. Those terms I would understand, but when you take a very unique country name like this and put it in your own story, that is a bit of an eyebrow raiser for me, and that does raise a bit of a red flag. Next story, Hunger Games. A poor, ordinary girl is forced to compete in a trial to the death, where she is forced to essentially battle to the death and survive against 23 other tributes from various regions of her country. In this world, she is essentially acting as a weapon for the tyrant ruler who wants to carry out genocide indirectly. She is also primped and pampered and put on live television and interviewed in front of a live studio audience. She is also recorded during the trials the entire time and also finds herself thrust unwittingly into this love triangle between one of her fellow tributes and the boy next door. Now, her tribute love interest is in this game with her, and they find a way to survive together. Only one day she has to go back into this trial to prove herself once again, and this is a climactic event that will spark radical change in the country and also end the prejudice and strife committed against the districts. This prejudice that once divided their entire country is completely snuffed out. This also comes with the change of leadership and the death of the former tyrant. Then our heroine picks her forever love. They all live happily ever after with their happy family. So let's move on to the Red Queen. In the Red Queen, an ordinary girl is actually found to be quite extraordinary, in her own way, of course. She steals from the prince in the marketplace when he is visiting in disguise, and she commits this theft because it's her only way to survive, is through thievery, because she is poor and her own kind are under duress. But then one day, a rare display of strength turns everyone's eyes onto her, and the royal family invites her to go to the palace. Now, while she is at the palace, she is training and competing with the elite of her country. This is where we meet the moody, broody bad boy who turns out to be Endgame, and the kind prince who is on the other side of this love triangle. But this kind prince actually turns foul, and he reveals himself to be a villain in the very end. He also metamorphizes into this mad king persona seemingly overnight, only for our heroine and her one true love to stop him once and for all and restore the kingdom to its former glory. And then they all live happily ever after. Another book I do attention to is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. Now, Cinder is a sci-fi retelling of the classic Cinderella story. Only in this story, Cinderella is a cyborg, and there is a lot of cyborg discrimination where she is from. She also just turns out to be the best mechanic in Beijing, China, who one day stumbles into her in the market dressed as a peasantry, none other but Prince Kai himself. Does that name sound familiar to you? It's also important to note that a plague has completely ravaged the land and everyone is under quarantine. Once you get the plague, you will surely die. And the plague, as we learn later on, was actually released by the Lunar, who are this elite superpowered race that live on the moon. Lunar also have the ability to manipulate energy around them, and it also makes them incredibly powerful because not only can they control the people who are around them, but they can also project images into people's heads and warp reality. They're essentially telepathic, but that's not the word that is used in the series, so that's why I refrained from calling them that. And then our heroine, who is secretly the lost princess of Luna, rises up to defeat the evil queen and stop her reign for good before she can dominate the world. She brings peace to a world that's completely racked with war and has a happily ever after with her prince at the very end. Now let's talk about Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. Clary is a ordinary girl living in modern day America. Her mother has a hidden identity and a dark past that she keeps hidden from her daughter. She masquerades around as a mundane, but she's actually special, and one day Clary stumbles into the magical world of demons and angels. She realizes that she can actually see the demons even though no other mundanes or humans can. And of course, she is unceremoniously thrust into another love triangle between the moody broody bad boy and her nice guy best friend, aka the boy next door. The moody broody bad boy is also a soldier trained to kill demons. And even though the two of them develop feelings for each other, they learn a dark secret that actually ties them together as family, and their relationship turns slightly incestuous. Those of you who are wondering how that could possibly cater to this book, just wait. We'll talk about it when we get to the third and final book, Fearless. Now let's talk about Lightlark by Ali Aster. Lightlark is about a mermaiden who is raised in the wildling community, and even though she is supposed to have powers, she is not. Even worse, she is actually the princess of the wildling kingdom. She also must pretend like she has powers in order to fight in the Centennial Tournament, which takes place on an island that only resurfaces every 100 years. And if she wins the trial, she will break the curse on her kingdom and restore peace to the realm, and will also get powers of her own. She is also mixed up in a love triangle between the king of Lightlark, Oro, and a nightshade named Grimm. Her best friend ultimately dies at the very end of Lightlark, and she becomes the ruler. These were all the books that I found to be incredibly similar to Powerless. I want you guys to keep those points in mind as we're talking about the series, so that way you see, one, how not only incredibly similar these books are to each other, and two, also to see how derivative Lauren Roberts' work really is. She follows the same basic formula as these other books did, and she doesn't even try to subvert any tropes and make this original in her own special way. Also, to add some clarity to the conversation, if we are accusing someone of plagiarism, let's be very careful with the way that we use that word, because I feel like a lot of people attribute it to certain areas where there isn't any plagiarism. So to add some clarity to that conversation, I do want to include the Webster Dictionary definition for plagiarism. Then you guys can let me know whether or not you think that Powerless falls under the umbrella term of plagiarism. And here it is. Plagiarism is the use of another's work, words, or ideas without attribution. The word plagiarism comes from the Latin word for kidnapper and is considered a form of theft, a breach of honesty in the academic community. Remember when I called them a literary pickpocket? I was actually unintentionally correct. I did want to provide this definition as well because I don't like it when people just hand out blatant accusations without having any evidence to support it. And again, I'm not accusing Lauren Roberts of plagiarizing here. I do think there were a couple instances where it got a little too close to the original material, and I personally think that is more or less on the shoulders of the publishing industry. For one, not calling her out on that kind of behavior, and two, not recognizing that this is a fan fiction and they need to put more work into making it its own original material. They should have been the ones who caught these very glaring similarities between this book and others, and I think that is more telling of the kind of material that this industry is now motivated to push out rather than on the material itself. I really hope that in the future, Lauren Roberts really puts more time and effort into making a story that is more her own rather than just pickpocketing from other stories that she most likely has read. Without further ado, let's get into it. We have to start in the very beginning with the very first book of the series, Powerless. Now, Powerless is a book about a young girl named Peyton, who is an ordinary. The only problem is that she lives in a country in which it is illegal to be an ordinary. She has no superpowers. Now, Peyton is passing herself off as a mundane or a psychic, but she mostly has psychic revelations about people's relationships, mainly around the concept of the ring. She can tell whether or not people have been married, whether or not they're engaged, etc. And it does come off as rather redundant, and never once is she ever wrong. Keep that in mind for the rest of the series. She always makes these deductions based off of observations, not unlike the TV show Psych, which is way better, and you guys should just go watch that instead of reading this.
Okay. Fine, you win. I got the information because I'm a psychic.
And for some reason, instead of setting up her own psychic stand in the marketplace and reading people's palms and walking them through their tarot cards, she decides that thievery is the best career choice to go with.
Is of a serpent, is of a bat, send us a signal from. So I hear of. Yes, you outside, please. It wants me to come outside now.
And one day she just happens to pickpocket the wrong person, and that person turns out to be the Prince Kai, who is actually on a mission that day to displace an ordinary family. Originally, he was going to kill the ordinary girl that these people were harboring, but then he decides to just release them into the desert, pat himself on the back for being merciful, and then go about his merry way, and just hope and pray that the family makes it to the other side.
In danger!
Now, the desert is called the Scorch, which, by the way, the Maze Runner also has a desert called the Scorch, and that detail was not lost on me. Once again, another eccentric name taken from another book and put in her own. And Prince Kai calls Peyton gray because of her silver hair. And he notices, because again this is through his point of view, that she is very hot for a young poor girl in the slums. So I guess the underlying tone of this story is, who needs diet pills when you can just be too poor to eat? Then you can finally be as thin as those Victoria's Secret models that you see on the magazines. What a great message to have in a YA novel. Love to see it. Also, a little side tangent, I really hate it when male main characters call the female main characters their potential love interests by a name that they did not attribute to themselves. It's almost like they're staking their claim on them in a strange way, almost like they're owning their name and therefore a part of them as well. It just comes across as very disrespectful, and I don't appreciate it. I find it incredibly annoying, and I would not be attracted to someone who treats me with that level of disrespect. But I'm not Peyton Gray, and apparently bars in hell.
She needs to sort out her priorities.
And she has absolutely no standards when it comes to men. Not even the very man who is banishing her own people through ethnic cleansing into the desert to die a long and painful death. What does she see in this guy exactly? Who can say? He's just one of those Nazis with a heart of gold. Stay tuned for a parade that will be thrown in his honor. Now, I do also want to mention that the reason why the ordinaries are targeted is because of a plague that ravaged the country ages ago. So years ago, before Peyton was born, there was a terrible plague that ravaged the kingdom of Ya. So years ago, a plague plagued their city. It killed a significant part of their population, and then giving the elites their superpowers. Anyone who was not given those powers was deemed an ordinary. Now, the king spread this rumor, which turned out to be false, that the ordinaries diminished the elite powers, which is why they're being executed, banished, and even hunted down like dogs in order to preserve the elite status and maintain their powers as well. Now, don't get me wrong, anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together could have probably figured out that ordinaries probably weren't doing this, because there have been ordinaries hiding in the town for years, and no one has ever reported being affected by this. If you're near an ordinary for an extended period of time, and you're noticing that your powers aren't diminishing, wouldn't that be evidence that the king is lying? Again, there's absolutely no logic going into this book at all, and all of these characters are just incredibly unintelligent.
It's so dumb. So dumb, it's brilliant. No, it's just dumb.
So as he's making his way out of the market, Xaden is stopped by a group that turns out to be part of the resistance. Now, the resistance is not only ordinaries who are fighting back against the elites, but also some of the irredeemable elites. Yes, they are racist against their own kind. Huge shocker. So the unmentionables, or the caste, there are different types of elites, right? There are some groups called the fatals and some groups called the silencers. And these ones are actually ostracized from the elite community because they are deemed too dangerous. Keep in mind, the silencers are actually the embodiment of the rumor that the king has actually put in place against Aries. So Xaden is stopped by this group, and there turns out to be a silencer there. And Xaden's superpower, like Peyton, is also a pickpocketer. He can take other people's powers and use them against them. But this particular time, the silencer is so strong that Xaden cannot access anyone else's powers, and the silencer is insistent on keeping him within his grasp. Now, Peyton is overhearing this interaction, and instead of recognizing that the very man, the enforcer, mind you, could potentially be taken out of the equation and could actually spare ordinary lives, she instead decides to save his life. Why would she do this, you might ask yourself? The answer is very simple. She wants to sleep with him. Personally, I don't think that's a very good excuse to betray your own people, but I don't know. That might just be because I don't have a fascism fetish, but Peyton obviously does, and good for you, girly. I'm not here to kink shame, but I am here to judge. So after this interaction, Peyton gains a lot of popularity in the market, and then she returns home to her fort to let Adina know that she has actually been chosen to be part of the trials that happens every 5 years. Now, the trials involve a group of elites, and unlike the Hunger Games, they don't have to actually die, but everything else about them is very similar. From the interviews, the pampering to look good for the audience, and the cameras, or the human sites that follow them around and record what's happening to project it to the live studio audience on the other side of the arena. And Adina is very distraught by this news because she knows that Peyton is not actually elite, and she is worried that Peyton will die. Peyton assures her that she will do her best to survive, and at the palace we meet the other tributes who are going to participate in the trials. Now, I do also want to mention that Kai has been groomed since he was very young to become the enforcer, or essentially the general of the army, who will one day be the right-hand man to the king, mainly his brother, Kit. Now Kai is the moody broody bad boy to Kit's honey bear persona. He is sweet and kind and generous, at least at first. Unfortunately, his character does change over time in the form of character assassination to make Kai look that much better. This has happened rather frequently in YA novels like this, so it did not come as much of a surprise that instead of drawing on the complexities of the choice and giving these characters actually full-fledged personalities and gray area and nuance, Lauren Roberts just decided to make one guy the Mad King in order to make the enforcer look better, which is always a cheap shot. I also don't like this because it feels like the author is stripping autonomy away from her powerful main character who just happens to be a girl. Why can't the girl just make a decision? Why is the concept of choice robbed from the female main character? Oh, because you don't actually want to give her a choice. No, she has no other choice but to date the grown man-child who commits active genocide. It's books like this that make me really lose my faith in humanity. Back to the story. I also want to mention that Kit has the ability to control water and fire. He is exactly one half of an avatar. Water, earth, fire. Don't worry, Kit. Work hard and you'll get those other elements. Sai and Kit are also half-brothers, and they also have a younger brother named Jax, who doesn't really hold any stake in the royal family and doesn't really have any claim to the throne or to the enforcer position. And this is the time we also meet our female rival, bitchy Blair. Yes, that is the actual term used for her in the book. I did not come up with that. Don't come for me. We meet bitchy Blair, who of course is very flirty with Kai and Kit, and will get very jealous of Peyton once she actually arrives on the scene. We also meet Braxton and Ace, who become antagonists in the trials later on. There's also the character of Hera, who plays a very small role in the story, but is more important in the novella Powerful, so just keep her in mind. Once Peyton arrives at the castle, she is immediately heralded as the Silver Savior, the one who saved Prince Kai, the future enforcer, from imminent doom. Prince Kai is incensed by this because he is emasculated by the fact that a woman saved his life. What a misogynist. So before the trials can begin, they of course had to go through training. And during this time, Lauren Roberts uses hand-to-hand combat between Peyton and Kai in order to elicit sexual tension, whereas to me it comes across as a bit problematic, but that's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. This may just be me, but seeing people who are supposed to be in love beating the shit out of each other doesn't make me want to root for them as characters. At the very least, they should definitely sign up for couples counseling, or maybe just get restraining orders and never see each other ever again. But since this book has no smut, I guess you have to include some sensual situations in there somewhere just to keep the reader interested. Also during this time, Peyton is also pampered to get ready for the interviews. She is also eating 3 straight meals a week, and is during this time that she finally remembers that she has a best friend named Medina, who is a seamstress who can help her make her own dresses. And of course, because Peyton is not like other girls, she asks Adina to make her silver gowns instead. Now this is very different from the tradition where everyone usually wears dark green, but of course she has to stand out as our main protagonist, so she wears silver gowns to the balls. And yes, there are quite a few balls in this book, pun intended.
Warning detectives. Collecting donations for the policeman's ball. We will have balls. I honestly have no response to that.
And also during her interview, Peyton has to pretend like she is a psychic, so she picks a man out from the crowd, and just by observing him for a couple of minutes, she is able to divine that he is actually recently engaged to his girlfriend.
I have keen senses. My senses are very keen.
And then she picks a couple other people out from the crowd, but never at any point does she ever really explain her powers, nor do we get, as a reader, learn about any religion or gods in the series. I think they mention God once or twice, but not in the way where, oh, they like pray to a god, they sacrifice to a god. They don't even really mention the gods any more than the plagues do, because the plagues is what was seen as almost like the hand of God, reaching down and blessing some people and cursing others. So no one ever really questions, where do your powers come from? If you're a psychic, then where do your revelations come from? Are there fates? Is there God giving you these messages? If Peyton could not even answer those very rudimentary, basic questions about her own powers, that would tip me off that she may not be she says she is. It's also at this point that Kai is realizing that he's starting to have these burgeoning feelings for Peyton. It's not just because they were dry humping and wrestling in the training montage, it's also because he has been secretly teaching her how to dance so that way she doesn't embarrass his brother out on the dance floor. And it's during these private little lessons that he starts to realize that he's actually falling in love with her. And Peyton is as well, but she's trying to suppress those feelings a lot more. And Kai, because he's a moody, broody bad boy, he doesn't know how to regulate his own emotions. He basically drinks himself into a stupor so he doesn't have to feel what he's feeling and then passes out. Next day, he wakes up with a massive hangover and a headache, and realizes that he is in the arena and the trials have started. This is the first of what's going to be 3 trials. Now, in this first trial, it's basically like a glorified game of capture the flag, where each contestant has a leather strap tied to the wrist that they must pry off of their other fellow contestants, and whoever wins the most leather strap wins. So if you make it to the end of the trial with your leather strap still intact, you move on to the next one. Now, during this trial, Kai comes across Braxton, and he, instead of killing him, pushes his face in a fire, which we as the reader are supposed to interpret as an act of mercy, when in reality, he's just torturing this man. But Braxton did threaten to kill him, so he was defending himself, but still, the felt over the top and very graphic, especially for a novel marketed to children. Then Peyton is not having as much luck, as she is fighting one of her fellow contestants, whose name escapes me at the moment. She does get mortally wounded, but luckily before she can actually pass away, Kai just happens to come across her in the forest, and he just also happens to have a nice little bottle of healing serum, a type of healing serum that can just magically wipe away any and all wounds. And this is the only time that we're going to see this, because throughout the rest of the series, and this healing serum is never once mentioned ever again throughout the rest of the series, despite the fact that it is literally a get out of jail free card. When a solution like this solves way too many problems, authors like to knock them off the shelves. So Peyton and Kai, after this interaction, decide that they're going to band together as a small alliance in order to just make it through to the end of the trial. So as the days pass, they're trying to find the edge of the arena, which is where the trial will end. And as they're about to cross the finish line, other contestants swarm them, and Ace during that time actually interprets this as a fight to the death and is trying to taunt Kai and creates illusions of himself so Kai can't figure out which one is the real Ace. And during that time, Ace also projects an illusion of himself over Jax, Kai's younger brother, and so Kai accidentally slashes Jax's throat. Now, Kai has run out of the healing serum, so he's trying to draw powers from the audience and find a healer, and during that time, Jax is bleeding out, and he somehow is miraculously saved by Kai. These characters in this book have the most insane plot armor. It's almost startling that anyone manages to die at all. I do also want to mention that during the trial, Hera is killed, and Hera is the cousin of Mac, who is Dina's love interest in Powerful. Just wanted to make that distinction really quickly. So after the trial, everyone is very shaken, they're a little traumatized, but they have to put up this front of apathy for the next ball. As every single trial is followed up with a celebration, which seems a bit tacky considering the fact that one of the princes almost just died. My biggest criticism for the king here is not only is he completely an inept ruler, but he also is willing to put his own sons, the heirs to his throne, in mortal danger. These people have absolutely no self-preservation skills in the slightest. Not to mention that it proves that he has absolutely no love for anyone but himself. He is more fascinated with control and power than his own family. He does not value human life even when it comes to his own elite sons. So then the second trial comes around, and this trial is very different because it's more based off of teamwork. So all the people who hate each other essentially are thrust into one group and are forced to work together as a team to climb up this mountain. Now while they're up on this mountain, they are being attacked by mutts, like giant wolves, snakes, etc. It is very Hunger Game coded at this point, and she is not even trying to hide it. Luckily for us, all of our characters make it to the top of the mountain, and they all move forward to the next level or the next trial. And after the third and final ball, the next trial begins. The next trial is very reminiscent of Harry Potter Goblet of Fire because they have to make their way through a maze that is also being controlled by these plant elite people. And even though Peyton and Kai are not working together, they somehow find their way to the middle of the maze. In the middle of the maze, there is this circle, and they are told that they have to kill the person in that circle in order to win the trial. Now, plot twist, the person in the circle is none other than Peyton's friend Adina. And Adina, who was a seamstress at the time, was imprisoned for a couple of days. Even worse, her fingers were broken in half, meaning that even if she did survive this, she would most likely never be able to sew again. And Peyton is tragically too late to save her friend, and Blair kills her with a branch because Blair has the powers of telekinesis and she can move objects with her mind. Peyton has even more of a personal vendetta against Blair, who has now declared the victory of the trials. But during that time, the resistance is actually attacking the castle. Now, the subplot that was happening more in the background was between Peyton and the resistance. So Peyton, early on in the book, found out that her father was actually in charge of the rebellion and that their headquarters were actually at their childhood home where her father was killed. So she goes back to her home, she finds a resistance there. She talks to them and she decides to be their mole on the inside, meaning that she's going to try to gather information from the palace in order to help them break in and form an uprising. And one of the ways that they needed her help was with a tunnel that would lead from the village into the castle where they could walk in undetected and then attack. So Peyton tricks Kit into thinking that she wants to get to know him better. She befriends him, gets very close to him, and then he lets her know where the location of the tunnel is. Rebellion friends also like to use homemade bombs. One of the first attacks that they have at the palace was at the first ball. Now, during this attack, they only sent in their ordinary rebellion members, which is a very stupid thing to do because not only are you crippling your rebellion by lessening its numbers, but you're sending in your own ordinary friends in to die because they are powerless against these elite people. And then in the final trial, the resistance finally manages to make their way into the castle, capture the king, silence the princes, and they're about to take over when all of a sudden Kai is magically able to use his siphoning abilities to draw out Kit's abilities and set his own silencer on fire. And once he does that, he is able to free his other family members. During this time, Peyton slipped out to grab the vest that Dina made for her and that she promised her she would wear it. And as she is coming back down to the skirmish, she sees that the king has left to the ballroom and he is seeking her out personally. And this is a grand reveal where the king tells her that he knew she was ordinary the entire time and this whole thing was a trap. He also tells her the third and final plot twist of the book was that it was actually Kai who killed her father and not the king. Peyton is dumbstruck by this revelation, but she still blames the king, and they engage in a hand-to-hand combat in which Peyton, an ordinary girl in her early 20s, is somehow able to overpower the super-powered king who is a brawny, meaning that he has super strength. I'm sorry. No, that's not possible. That wouldn't have happened. I don't claim this. But before she manages to kill him, the king does brand her with an O on her chest to always mark her as an ordinary, so that way she never forgets who she truly is. After killing the king, Kai catches her in the act, and instead of doing his job and imprisoning the very traitor who killed the king, he releases her into the scorch, tells her to run as fast as she can, giving her a head start for the second book. The final scene of the book is through Kai's perspective. Kit is a brand new king, and Kit tells Kai that he needs to go find Peyton and bring her back. So that was the overall summary of Powerless. Let's get into the things that I actually liked about it. One of the main highlights of this book was the character of Adina. She is all sunshine and sparkles and happiness. She is the embodiment of optimism, is a bright shining light in this otherwise very dismal and grisly world, and I really appreciated her insight and her character. She's such a good friend to Peyton, who quite frankly does not deserve Adina, and we will see that more in the powerful novella once we get into it. But I also felt really bad for Adina because she is one of the only people of color in the entire story, and she is unceremoniously killed off because unfortunately she is also the embodiment of the disposable POC character trope. A trend that I sincerely hope dies out as quickly as possible. I also did like the sequences of them getting the pampering with the nice baths and the balls. I really like those scenes a lot because these scenes offered up a lot of levity, and I really did appreciate that because it felt like I was able to breathe and just enjoy the story until we got back to the plot. I also liked some of the superpowered people like the clones, the silencers. I also liked the idea of the illusionist. I found some of these superpowers very fascinating in the book. Even though Lauren Roberts didn't really use them as creatively as she probably could have, I did appreciate seeing those because you don't really get to see a lot of those superpowers. I also like the fact that Kit is a dual-powered elite because this also goes into his two-faced character trait. And what I mean by that is in the very beginning of the series, Kit is more or less like water, right? He's very soft, malleable, go with the flow, easy, peaceful, and he's overall a very kind person. But then over time, after he's betrayed by Peyton, he turns more into this burning, raging ball of hellfire that is determined to scorch the earth and everyone along with it. And I'm not sure Lauren Roberts intentionally did that, but I really do like how sometimes people's powers really do bespoke to their personalities and draw out a part of them that also foreshadows their fate. I could be giving her more credit than she deserves, but I did appreciate that part. It's also sad because we only see him use these powers sparingly because Kit is more of an afterthought because he's not really endgame and Kai is. So we never really get to explore his character that much, unfortunately, and even when he is fighting in battles, sometimes he even favors weapons over his own abilities, which doesn't make any sense. sense. And you'll see what I mean by that when we talk about Fearless. So let's talk about things I don't like about Powerless. Like I mentioned before, Adina is fulfilling the trope of the disposable POC best friend in this story. I hate that trend, it's awful. But in my other video when I mentioned this, another commenter came out and told me, hey, she wasn't the only person of color who was disposed of in the trials, and she mentioned a couple other characters as well, characters I completely forgot about because they were obsolete. Again, disposable characters who just also happen to be people of color. And I thought that was really distressing, and I was sad that I didn't notice that before, but that just goes to show how little Lauren Roberts really considers these other characters that are around Peyton and Kai. They're all there for them, and we never really delve into them or give them any more complexity other than a two-dimensional cardboard cutout of a character. I also didn't like our introduction to Blair because Lauren Roberts sets her up for failure. We're supposed to hate her right off the bat, and instead of allowing us to get there organically, she just tells us, oh, we have to hate this character now because she's bitchy Blair. Another thing I don't like about Powerless are the names that she attributes to the people with powers. They're very juvenile and in some cases even plagiarized from other characters in superhero comic books. She calls people who can run very fast Flashes, like the superhero. She also calls people who can teleport Blinks, like Blink from Days of Future Past, the X-Men movie. And Lauren Roberts just not think that anyone would notice? Interesting. I did notice quite a few spelling grammar errors. There was so much redundancy in certain parts of this book where it just felt like the author was just repeating the same thing over and over and over again because she was trying to hit a certain page quota and it just got exhausting. Even worse, the alliteration, the amount that she used in here is utterly astounding. It was so off-putting because I felt like I was reading a Dr. Seuss novel, and that's not what I signed up for. There were as many as 5, 10, 20 examples of alliteration on a page alone. It got to the point where I just felt like Lauren Roberts was overcompensating for the fact that she is a brand new author. She is very young, so she doesn't really have a lot of experience with writing. So I feel like she was trying to sound like a better author. And how does she do that? Oh, she tries to overuse certain types of literary devices or figurative language, but here it just rendered moot and made the reading experience that much more difficult, and I just did not appreciate it. Another thing I hate about this series overall, like I mentioned in my Silver Elite video, that I really hate this whole Nazi sympathizer angle that we have going on here, because the underlying tone of that message is quite distressing. How is it that people are able to read history books, look at the news, see what's happening in the world around us, and think, oh yeah, that's a character I want to root for? And I'm not necessarily critiquing the fact that these characters are bad people. I am criticizing the lack of a redemption arc. These people do not deserve a happily ever after. Their happy ending feels unearned because they did not put in the work to actually change to become better people.
I've recently taken a long look at the man in the mirror.
Kai was like so close. He was right there and he just completely missed it. And I wish that Lauren Roberts took the time to build on these characters and focus on their development rather than the romance between them. I personally would have been totally fine with Kai and Peyton never even getting together until the very, very end of the series, just to prove how far Kai has come and how much he changed as a person. Redemption arcs are vital when it comes to villains and characters who do villainous things. It almost feels like Lauren Roberts is just telling us, yes, he's a murderer, yes, he committed acts of genocide, but just pretend like he didn't do that. Just ignore it. It's fine. Because yes, Kai has actually killed people, and he said he's killed a lot of people in the name of the king. We never really get to see that, but then we're also supposed to root for him and Peyton to get together without him putting in the work to become a better version of himself. Where's the fun in that? Also, I do not know why Peyton would be attracted to a man who kills her own people. That makes absolutely no sense. This character is so dumb. I hate her. She is the worst. And I think that really harkens to how much I really dislike Peyton as a character is because she's so willing to overlook horrible behavior committed by a man that she is sexually attracted to. Because a man is hot, it is not an excuse all the terrible things that he has done, because yes, displacing people from their home is an act of ethnic cleansing. It is under the umbrella term of genocide, and he still is a bad person. He's still enforcing the law that his father set up before him. A law with an unfounded claim that ordinaries hurt people when they don't. And never once in this entire series does he ever investigate for himself and try to find out what exactly happened. Both of these characters are just atrocious. Honestly, I think they deserve each other. Peyton is so self-centered. She ignores Adina for days. She doesn't even really notice that her friend was in prison until she sees her in the middle of the maze, and then she remembers she has to be a good friend and tries to save her.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
She also does not utilize her psychic abilities a way that would actually make it indelible to her life and to her career. Why is she stealing when she could just pretend to be a psychic and get paid to do psychic readings, seances, tarot card readings? There's so many ways that she could have utilized this in the book. I also hate books where things happen to the characters and they react more than the characters act and the story follows from there. It feels like Peyton has absolutely no autonomy. She doesn't even have claim over her own name because her love interest calls what he wants and disregards her discomfort around that name. I don't like these characters, and even worse was the fact that I, as an Adina lover, got a bit more of Adina in the next book, the novella called Powerful. I didn't care because I already knew that she died. So for those of you who don't know, in the order of the series, it goes Powerless, Powerful, Reckless, and Fearless. And Powerful is a story through Adina's eyes. Now in this novella, Lauren Roberts thrusts us back into this world right where Powerless started. So Adina is a seamstress, but she's also a mundane, meaning that she has special abilities too. Abilities that she, for some reason, refuses to save herself. So Powerful basically follows Dina's entire experience throughout the book of Powerless. So we pick up where Powerless started, and then we end right when she dies. And this is a pet peeve of mine. I hate books centered around characters that we know are going to die because it takes away the emotional gut punch, at least for me, knowing that this character is going to die. Why should I become more emotionally attached to a character that I'm not going to see for the rest of the series? I understand that this is a very beloved novella in the community, but I just found it to be obsolete. And even worse, it added absolutely nothing to the original story. We don't get any of Adina's origin story at all. We don't really learn about anything about her besides her romance between her and her boyfriend Mac, the snack who does not smile back because he is another moody, broody bad boy who refuses to smile. When he and Adina initially meet, Adina is alone now because Peyton is in the trials and she's trying to steal sticky buns. That's another theme of this entire series, that these girls love sticky buns with a passion. Like, this is an addiction at this point. So Adina is a terrible thief and she's trying to steal from this man's cart, and as she's running away, the Imperials almost catch up to her, and Mac, who she believes at the time is also another phaser, uses his abilities to save her by grabbing her and pulling her into a house and hiding. Keep this in mind, Dina could have at any time during this entire interaction phased away and run and hid and found safety through a wall, through a house, but no, she didn't want to do that because she didn't want to be surprised by what she would find on the other side, running the risk of getting killed by the Imperials rather than using the abilities that she was gifted with in the first place. And it's characters like this that make me realize that these powers in the series are really wasted on people. Because even worse, once you find out that she's a phaser, meaning that she can move through solid objects, and you remember this woman was imprisoned, and there's no mention of any silencers in the prison. At any time, she could have just left. How did they break her fingers if they can't touch her? How does that logically make any sense? It's so strange to me. It would be very different to me if Adina had a hyper ability where she could just smell really well, do a lot of human tasks more quickly. That would make way more sense with her character, because someone who can move through solid objects should not be killed by solid objects. She gets stabbed through the heart with a branch from bitchy Blair. How does that make any sense at all? So back to the story. So she meets Mac in the market after he saves her from the Imperials, and they get to talking, and she finds out that he also has a loved one in the trials. Now, Adina and Peyton have a very close friendship, and they basically regard each other as sisters. We get a little bit of a flashback in the very beginning to when they met and their origin story as friends. They run into each other at the market, and that's when they have their little meet cute. And it's at this point when I read that scene and I was like, why aren't these two together? We just need more bi representation in books. That's my personal opinion. So she meets Mac, and he also has a loved one who is in the trials. He's trying to get his cousin named Hera from the castle because he's scared that she's going to die, but she ends up doing anyway. So again, this whole thing was just moot. So he's trying to get into the palace. Adina wants to rescue Peyton too. They concoct a plan together in order to make Mac look like a soldier and find a way for her to get inside as well. And with their powers, they can sneak inside the castle, get their loved ones, and bring them home, which I'm not sure how that would exactly work, because once they break out of the castle, then people will know that they're gone and be looking for them. Again, not a lot of logic going on in these people's heads. So Adina initially meets Mac, and she's right, this big ball of sunshine. She's so happy and optimistic and sweet, and Mac, who is very attractive man, is very sour. He doesn't like to smile, and he doesn't like the fact that Adina likes to smile, so he tries to bring her down a peg and teach her a lesson about how messed up the world is. Keep in mind, this woman has been living on the street for years, so I am a little surprised that she isn't more jaded, but I did not like that inner monologue of Mac the snack who does not smile back, because it just proved that he is also a terrible love interest. Why would you want to rob someone of their happiness?
My mother once told me that bad news is just good news in disguise.
Was this before she abandoned you?
Yes, it was.
Just let them be happy. She's stupid, but who cares? Why wouldn't you want your partner to be happy? It makes absolutely no sense. But as we talked about from the previous book, Adina is able to make it into the palace because Peyton recruits her as a servant to make dresses for her for free. Dresses that Adina will never wear, by the way, in order to make her look good for the princes, essentially. And then Mac, who still uses his new guard getup that Adina made him, is also able to sneak into the palace and masquerade around as a guard, and no one just notices this random extra guard walking around the palace, but I digress. At least we're consistent with the lack of intelligence in this book. That's good to know. So he's able to sneak in, and as they are working together to try to figure out how to break their loved ones out of the castle, they start to develop a close friendship and a relationship, and Adina realizes that she's falling in love with Mac, but she doesn't know that Mac and Hera are cousins, so she thinks that Mac is trying to break into the palace to break out his paramour and then run away with her. And then it's not until Hera dies that Mac reveals that she was actually his cousin. Adina is very delighted by this because that means that she has no more competition, that he and her can have a relationship. Mac is starting to develop feelings for her too. We see through his eyes that he is finally able to open up and smile because of Adina and because he's in love.
Now I'm always smiling.
And it's during this conversation where they're confessing their feelings for each other that we get another plot twist. Yes, Lauren Roberts loves to litter her books with plot twists. They are everywhere. This plot twist is that Mac is actually very similar to Kai. His powers, like Kai's, are to siphon powers from the people around him. And his whole backstory revolves around the fact that his parents were hiding him because he was too powerful. The king didn't like that there was someone else out there like Kai, so they were trying to hunt him down too and dispose of him. So he has also had to pretend to be something that he's not, very similar to Peyton. Once Adina learns about this, she realizes that they are never all going to be safe and they all need to leave Ilya as soon as possible. Before that can happen, she is captured, taken down to the prison, her fingers are broken and she's tortured, and then she is finally released into the maze. Again, at any time, Dina could have just left. She could have fled the scene, she could have fled the castle, she could have made the branch phase through her body, she could have manipulated the other guard's hands that was trying to break hers. And this whole scene was so frustrating. Maybe it's because I skimmed over this part that I didn't see any reference to silencers in the prison, because that would make the most sense, right? Because if you're imprisoning elites, you need to have a silencer in there in order to make sure that they stay there. But the problem is with the silencers is that they can only silence one person at a time. King only has one in his army. And if there are other prisoners in the prison, that means one of them is bound to get out. And one of those people could be Adina. She apparently was perfectly fine with dying, leaving behind her best friend and the love of her life for no reason whatsoever. That was incredibly frustrating. There were so many opportunities that she had to break out and she chose not to do them because she is nothing more than a plot device. She's not even a real character at this point. She's just an inciting incident for Peyton to motivate her more to kill the king. That's all it was. Eventually Blair. She does eventually kill Blair. Spoiler alert. This whole novella felt like a waste of time. Luckily, it was short. I think it only took me a couple hours to read, but I still felt like a waste of time. So things I liked about this story, I did like being in Adina's head outside of the part where she just refused to escape the prison that she was being held in. The final scene where she does die is very emotional. I did tear up a little bit because, again, I really liked her as a character. I felt really bad for Mac, and even worse considering what happens to him in Fearless. We'll get to that later. But I really liked the scene of her in the afterlife, and basically her soul or her spirit ascends and becomes part of the stars. That was really well written. It's even better because there was almost no alliteration. So it's good to know that Lauren Roberts, when given the opportunity to be original, to step outside of her comfort zone of alliteration, can actually be a good writer, but she is unfortunately bogged down by this plot and bad character writing and derivative content. So I feel like that scene was very interesting because we don't see a lot of, and I really like the concept of the afterlife, and we do get another scene like that in Fearless, but unfortunately the rest of the book was so bad that even those 5 pages of relief was just not enough to salvage the book for me. This book didn't need to be written other than to introduce the character of Mac to us and to pack an even worse punch in Fearless. Things I did not like about this book that I feel like I mentioned this quite a few times, but I'll do it once more with feeling. I hated how unintelligent these characters are. The initial plot of them trying to break into the castle I think was an interesting one, even though it was severely half-baked, because once they break them out, where are they going to go? To the Scorch? To the other neighboring kingdoms? They did not think this plot through because they're putting all of them in danger, because now these people are going to come after them because they kidnapped their contestants for their trial. I hated the fact that Adina just refused to use one of the most useful powers ever in the whole world. I mentioned this in my Powerless video too, that I would love to have the ability to move through solid objects because one, it alleviates a lot of issues like running into things because I'm a bit clumsy, going from room to room with ease, moving through traffic, preventing other accidents. There's so many good things that come from just not being a solid corporeal being. And then you have Adina here who refuses to use her powers for no good reason. Why can't you use your powers to run away from the Imperials? Why can't you use your powers right now to go get Peyton out of the castle? Why can't you use your powers to break yourself out of prison? Personally, I think this story should have just been Peyton and Adina running into the Scorch together and having their own relationship, but unfortunately that's never going to happen. And now we're on to the technically second book of the series. So Powerless was the first, Powerful was 1.5 in between the first and second book, and now we're on to the second official book of the series. So Reckless takes place after the king has died, Kit has ascended to the throne, Kai is now the official enforcer of Ilya, and Peyton is on the run. Now she is trying to escape through the Scorch to Dorne. Now this particular kingdom is very ordinary friendly. They're pro-Ares and anti-elite. And we soon learn in this story that everyone around Ilya is anti-elite, which also begs the question why the resistance didn't just team up with people of Dorne and the other neighboring kingdoms in order to form a coup and take over Ilya. The rebellion is also incredibly inept and terrible at their jobs. So at least that's consistent. So Peyton is now running through the desert and Kai has been hired to hunt her down and bring her back to the castle alive. Now, Peyton, of course, because she's the most overpowered ordinary in all of the world, makes it to Dorne, and upon arrival, she is desperate to find a way to make money. And she realizes that she can fight in the ring as presumably a man under the guise of Shadow, her new little pseudonym, kind of like the character from Sonic the Hedgehog. And Peyton, who is a surprisingly good fighter, is able to defeat a lot of these other guys in the ring and make a name for herself and start to get money. So this is her new job now. This is how she's forming her life in Dorne. I do also want to mention here that Peyton is very overpowered because not only is she very good in hand-to-hand combat, but she also is very good with weapons. For example, a bow and arrow, which she does use in the trials, not dissimilar to the bow and arrow that Katniss uses in the Hunger Games. Just wanted to put that out there. But her life in Dorne has an expiration date because Kai and the other Imperials arrive in Dorne. So Kai and his Imperial friends are not exactly very popular, but at least Kai gets to see Abigail, the young girl from the Powerless book that he rescued. She tells him that, hey Kai, you actually did a great thing. You saved our family. Now we're living excellent lives in Dorne as immigrants. And I hated this part so much because it was so obvious that Lauren Roberts was trying to assure us as the reader that, hey, Kai's actually doing a generous, good thing by displacing these people from their homes and forcing them to enter a country that they've never been a part of. They have no stake in, they have no home, no food, no family, no money, but by golly, they're gonna miss. All they have to do is pull themselves up by their bootstraps and they'll be fine. No biggie. It's totally okay, really. In this day and age, we're going with that message. Unlike some people, I don't fall for that bullshit. I call a spade a spade. He still is a fascist who doesn't learn his lesson and only respects Ares because the woman that he's in love with is one. The message in all of this is if you want to fix fascism, just sleep with them. And all I have to say to that is no. It does not take Kai very long to find Peyton because Dorne apparently is a very small kingdom, and unfortunately she did draw some attention to herself by becoming Shadow in the fighting ring. So he goes in and he challenges her to a fight and he calls himself Flame because he's the light to her shadow. The irony of that is not lost on me. I do not appreciate that symbolism there. So they get into the ring and of course Kai is able to overpower her and he is able to chain her up and claims her as his prisoner and he's taking her back to Ilya. Now while they're on their way and in the desert, the Imperials and them are attacked by the resistance, or at least least what's left of it after the attack on Ilya. And this is when Peyton is told that the resistance is basically over. The fight is done, they lost their leader, Callum, and they're running around like a discombobulated chicken with their head cut off because they have nowhere else to go and they're not sure what to do. So the resistance helps her get rid of the Imperials, and they now take Kai on as their prisoner. Once again, why couldn't the resistance just go send recruits to the neighboring kingdoms, beg them to help them in the fight, and then take over? Yeah. Oh, because everyone in this book is stupid. I forgot. But over time, what little is of the rebellion, and Peyton and Kai are separated from each other. They run into bandits, but of course Peyton and Kai are able to fight them off. And then this is when Peyton reveals that she took a journal from her childhood home. So before Peyton can flee into the desert, she goes back to her childhood home one last time to grab her father's journals. As she's rifling through this, Kai and the Imperials arrive at her house and they set it on fire, and Peyton is hiding in the chimney, and somehow she is able to slip out and escape unscathed and run into the desert with the journals that miraculously also survived the fire. How does she do this, you may ask? It's thanks to this magical thing I like to call plot armor. She is never going to die no matter what horrific situation she gets herself into, and at this point I lose all engagement with the story because I know that there is absolutely no threat. Because after reading this scene, I knew there was absolutely no threat to Peyton or Kai's life. These two are going to make it to the very bitter end, and that just really irked me. I do also want to mention this is not the first time in the series that we found her stuck up a chimney like Santa Claus, because in the very beginning of Powerless, she's stealing a sticky bun for Adina, and she hides chimney. So back to the journals. In her journals, her father talks about her mother, how he met her, how he fell in love, and how she died during childbirth. And then he also talks about the plagues and being a healer during this time. It was very reminiscent of the 2020 pandemic. And he was talking about how the plague was just everywhere. Lots of people were dying. It was horrible. And then even worse, once the powers started to manifest themselves, how the king was paying off healers or doctors to lie about the fact that the ordinaries were basically poisoning the elites of their powers. So he saw that firsthand, and he wrote it down in the journals to basically say, hey, I see what's happening here. We are being paid and forced to lie and spread false information about this plague and about the ordinaries that is completely false. When Peyton reads that, she feels vindicated. When Kai reads that, he's in denial because he cannot fathom that his tyrannical father, who liked to torture him, to toughen him up, to make him into the future enforcer, would ever lie. So you're telling me that this man was willing to commit acts of genocide, even torture his own family, but lying is where he draws the line? I think this whole scene was particularly funny to me because it just goes to show how much of a paradigm shift can really hurt people, and I really wish that Lauren Roberts took more time to really talk about the psychology behind that, realizing that everything you thought to be true was actually false, how traumatizing that could be, and how very difficult it is for someone to try to adjust their lives and justify that new reality, but also come to grips with the fact that they were wrong and also acted in harmful ways. I think that would have been a really cool discussion to have in this book, but of course, because she's way more focused on the terrible romance, we're not going to get into it. It's also really hilarious to me that this is a tough pill for him to swallow, is because the entire time Kai has known Peyton, not once did anything happen with his powers. They never diminished, it never got worse, he never felt sick or ill or anything. And at no point does Kai ever sit down and think to himself, it's weird that my girlfriend is an ordinary and I've been around her for weeks. We've been in close proximity together, we've shared kisses, we've danced together, and at no point did any of my powers diminish. So what does that mean? He doesn't come to this conclusion by himself. He needs to be spoon-fed to him from his girlfriend's dead father's journal that his father was lying. How thick can you get? That's the thing that bugs me about books like this, is when the author does not trust the characters and, in relation, the readers to come to this conclusion. Because this whole interaction is to make the readers realize that, oh, okay, this is actually founded. The king did actually lie. But we already knew that. You already told us this before. Why are we talking about this again? If not to help Kai come to that conclusion by himself. And maybe he was thinking it, maybe he was suspecting it over a period of time, but in the excerpts in which we were in his head, never once is he questioning his father's words. He is just so focused on finding Peyton, getting her back to Kit, that he doesn't even bother to sit down and think, wait a minute, is my whole life a lie? Because all he thinks about is Peyton, all Peyton thinks about is him. And this entire time, he's more wrestling with whether or not he should actually turn her into Kit, because he is the enforcer and he is still tied to his brother and forced to do his bidding, he does turn in his ordinary girlfriend, but with the brand new hope of being able to convince Kit that this was actually a huge misunderstanding. The ordinaries are not actually bad people, and he shouldn't have to kill Peyton. Because this entire time, Kai has been under the impression that Kit is trying to kill Peyton. But when they get to the palace, they approach Kit, and plot twist, Kit actually already knows that the ordinaries are good people. In fact, Callum isn't actually dead. The leader of the resistance has actually been in prison coaching him and talking about, oh, this is what the rebellion is all about. Ordinaries aren't actually bad people. They're not poisoning the elites against their powers. None of that's going on. It was all a lie. Kit somehow got access to libraries and to journals that somehow still exist in the library that talk about how the ordinaries are actually fine. And now he has a change of heart. And instead of killing Peyton, he actually wants to marry her instead. My goodness. I will say the one thing I did like about this story was that it was shorter. I feel like Lauren Roberts is very palatable when you only get small doses of her. The worst part is that these two short books were framed by very long books, and it really throws off the pacing. I really wish that she kept these stories nice, short, sweet, and to the point. The thing that would have made it a much more enjoyable reading experience, despite the fact that everything else about the stories is unenjoyable for me. I also did really like Peyton's little trek through the desert, the fact that she was grappling with her own existence, her own mortality, and worried that she wasn't going to make it to the other side. I thought that was very interesting. When Lauren Roberts is given the time to really sit back and focus on her character, she does really excellent character work when she actually puts in the time and effort to do it. I also did like the fact that we were in a different setting than Ilya for the vast majority of the book. I really liked exploring Dorne, and I really did like how this place acted as an asylum for all of these immigrant ordinary people who are running from Ilya. I really liked how they had that switch up there where the elites were actually the ones that were disregarded and discriminated against because of their own racism. Here are the consequences to your actions. If you act like jerks, no one likes you and no one wants you in their town, and they immediately kicked them out once they got Peyton. Now we're going to get to the things I did not like about this book, which was basically everything. I hated the fact that the resistance were so quick to give up once they lost their leader, and they didn't even consider recruiting people from Dorne or the other neighboring kingdoms to try to join forces together. I thought that was really short-sighted of them and made me lose faith in the rebellion as a whole. I still hate Peyton. They are just as insufferable as they were in Powerless. All they can think about are themselves. And I was sitting there reading this and I was thinking to myself, babe, people are dying. You really need to sort out your priorities.
There's people that are dying.
The alliteration and the repetition are just as bad. I hate the dual POV throughout this entire series because it basically feels like we're getting the same information just with a different perspective, and it becomes redundant over time. We really don't get that much more insight into either one of them. It would be nice to see them have a conversation where there is a bit of a misunderstanding and they're both grappling with their own interpretation of that conversation. We never see that. So what's the point of this dual POV other than to take up more space and to deliberately waste my time, which annoys me. I hate how corny it is. I hate how ride or die they are for each other. Kai is always, oh, I love her so much. She is the moon. She is the stars. And I'm sitting there like, and I am sick. Nice to meet you.
You know, no matter how often I see it, the sight of young lovers never fails to make me sick.
It was just so irritating. And I also don't like how many plot twists there are in Lauren Roberts' books. For me personally, a story should only have at most 2 plot twists, because otherwise the readers feel like they have no grasp of reality, like everything about that story is a lie. It feels like the author is just intentionally trying to pull the rug out from underneath the reader by outsmarting them by not making their books predictable. There's nothing wrong with a predictable story. What is wrong is feeling like the author was lying to you the whole time and nothing that you learn from the story is actually accurate. I think it is very disengaging for readers when they feel like they're constantly having to keep up with brand new twists and turns, because then they're just sitting there thinking, is any of this real at all? Is any of this important information? Why do I need to learn this stuff when we're just going to turn around in the next couple of pages and refute that and get brand new information? Again, it makes no sense. And here is a one final thing about this book that I really do hate, and that is the chapters where we have Kit's point of view. So during this time, Kit is starting to slowly descend into madness. And during that descent, he is grappling with his own moral issues. He is really at war within himself because he knows that he's sending Kai off to essentially kill Peyton, and he knows that his brother is very conflicted about it. He's also very conflicted about it because in the previous book, he actually liked Peyton. And then he starts to talk to his surrogate mother, the cook, who always took care of the boys ever since they were very young. And she's coaching him through this and trying to help him and act as a mentor. And then at the very end of the story, we learn that Kit has been having these conversations with the rebel leader, and we never got to see that. You asked, we never got to see that? Oh, because it needed to serve as a plot twist at the very end. Personally, I think it would have been way more interesting if we saw Kit talking to Callum, the leader of the rebels, because then it would be like, oh, this is him trying to have his own redemption arc and learn from his father's mistakes. And it turns out the reason why she didn't want us to see those scenes was not because she just didn't think they were important, it's because it turns out that Kit and Callum knew each other all along and were actually in cahoots together the entire time, which makes his scenes where he's grappling with his own morality so obsolete because the whole time he was bad. Then you think about it and you wonder, why would Lauren Roberts intentionally lie to the readers and tell them this is what Kit is actually thinking when he's really not? He knew Callum the entire time. He knew he was a mind reader. He knew that Callum secretly worked for his father to act as a mole on the inside of the rebellion. Then he's thinking, oh man, my brother really likes his girlfriend. No, what was the point of wasting our time? This felt like Lauren Roberts was intentionally misleading the readers, and I hate it when authors do that. I paid $20 to be lied to. I don't like that. I also don't like the brotherly love triangle we have going on here. It's really gross, and it gets even worse in the next book, the third and final installment of the Powerless Series, Fearless. So Fearless picks up right where we left off with Reckless, where Peyton is now going to be the potentially new queen of Ilya. Some of you might be thinking, why on earth would Kit want to marry Peyton? It turns out, in order to instill this sense of peace and prosperity and unity in the kingdom, he wants to marry an ordinary to prove to his people and to the neighboring kingdoms that he wants to rebuild Ilya, join forces again with the ordinaries, and instill peace in the land. And this alliance of a marriage is his way of doing that. And I can agree to a certain extent because marriages like this used to happen all the time, where in order to instill a sense of alliance amongst countries or kingdoms, people would have to marry their offspring, so to speak, to each other. That way they feel more secure in their alliance. Same thing here. Kai is understandably very upset at the fact that Kit is marrying his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Peyton is actually happy that she's able to serve her country and make it a better place. However, she's also very upset because she's in love with Kai and not Kit. But she has to do this because without her, the alliance between the heirs and the elites are essentially off. And this plan is never going to work. Also, side note, can I just say that I really hate it when authors use the same first letter in names of main characters that we hear multiple times, because it gets really confusing. Several times throughout this entire video, I kept mistaking Kai for Kit. A couple of times I had to reshoot some of those scenes because I could not keep the names straight because they're too similar. But just like any time there is a change to the system or the norm or the status quo, people will always resist. And there are quite a few elites who don't like the fact that they're gonna have to be nice to ordinaries because they profited off of the genocide by feeling more special. They also need a little more convincing that the ordinary rumor about them siphoning off their powers was actually false. And again, through logic and reason, these people finally start to come to terms with the fact that the king was lying to them and paid healers to lie to them as well. But the people are still not quite satisfied with Peyton as a future queen, so in order to prove her worth to people who would otherwise have killed her if given the chance, she has to perform, you guessed it, 3 more trials to prove her worth as the queen that fall in line with the main mantra or motto of the kingdom: bravery, benevolence, and brutal. Despite the fact that she already showed those in the previous trials, I guess these people just weren't really paying attention, Peyton does agree to go through the trials. Now, as she's suffering through these trials, I do also want to mention that Prince Kai and her are having an affair, and they're not even being slick about it. This entire time that she's supposed to be engaged to Prince Kit, they're running around sloppily, making out and being intimate with each other, and everyone in the castle knows. All it takes is one person to catch you, and you're done for. Even King Kit knows that they are sleeping together, and he doesn't do anything about it. The worst part of this is that Kai says that once she's married, he will no longer sleep with her anymore, because then she will be his queen, and his main role now will be to protect her. Funny how men like this respect the sanctity of marriage more than they do their own brother. Because if Kai really loved and respected Kit, he would not be so flippant about his affair with Peyton, a woman that Kai knows Kit also liked at one point. Even worse, Prince Kai forces himself several times into Peyton's space. He crosses her boundaries several times and makes more work for her own servants. Several times he dismantles her door off of its hinges and just throws it to the side. Why can't you just use your blink ability, man? Why can't you use your phasing ability? Why are these people making things so much more difficult than it needs to be? Kai just shows what a terrible partner he is, because no matter how Peyton feels about him, he will always find a way to force himself on her, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally. She'll never be safe from this man. Honestly, I don't know why she's not more terrified of Kai than she is. This is not emblematic of a healthy, caring partner. And honestly, it seems like he's putting her in just as much danger, if not more, than she was before. Because if people find out that they're having an affair, like the actual nobility of the elites find out that they're having an affair, and the people themselves, it's gonna get so messy for everyone and destroy the alliance. But they don't care about that. All I care about is bumping uglies and rubbing their affair in Kit's face. So the first trial is Peyton has to descend down into the catacombs to retrieve the crown of the queen. And she does that, but with a lot of trouble. It's dark, she can't see anything, she's stumbling around, getting stuck and trapped in the bones. But then she eventually gets the crown, and just as she's about to leave, she runs into another band of bandits. And using her wits and her wiles and her overpowered plot armor, she is able to fend 4 grown men all by herself, all the while still carrying the crown. Keep that in mind, because that's going to be very important for later. So she gets back to the palace, proves to them, hey, I got the crown, here it is. And that was supposed to show that she was brave. Second test is to show her benevolence, or her ability to reach out across the seas and form an alliance with a neighboring enemy kingdom. So she does that. So she goes on a ship with all of these other elites, and they are actually delivering a bunch of roses to this neighboring kingdom, the name of which escapes me at the moment. And as they're going, Prince Kai and Peyton are still hanging out together, being very intimate together. And one night, when they are separated, Peyton is attacked by the crewmates on the ship, and they are about to throw her overboard. Keep in mind, 2 chapters ago, she was able to fend off an entire band of bandits on her own, and now all of a sudden that Kai is there, she just forgets how to fight. Her arms don't work the same anymore. She's now a damsel in distress, desperate to have a prince come and save her. And save her he does, unfortunately for us. And then he threatens a captain who turns out to be a hyper who overheard everything happening, did absolutely nothing to stop his own sailors. Kai threatens that he's going to bring it back to the king and kill him, something that he never does, by the way. He never gets retribution for this, which just proves that Kai is all talk and no action. But some of the other sailors who were trying to kill her do get killed, so there was some kind of justice at the end of all of this, but again, this just proves that Kai is not a man of his word. But at least he does protect Peyton against the sailors, so he has one good thing going for him. However, if this was just another random ordinary and not the woman that he was sleeping with, he probably wouldn't have cared as much. Just saying. So they finally arrive at the kingdom, and the queen is very impressed by Peyton. She is very grateful for the roses, and then she lets Peyton stay in the castle, but not Kai. And what does Kai do? He worms his way into her room against the queen's wishes, a queen that they are desperately trying to impress. And he is disregarding her wishes, deceiving her, and trying to get away, and literally try to get away with breaking and entering into her palace. The queen does know at the end of the day, and she is almost impressed by the fact that Kai was able to find his way into her castle. And I was sitting there wondering, why didn't you just let them have their own room together? Why would you let him go through all this trouble just to get back into her room in the first place? None of these people make any sense to me. So even though the queen is very happy about the roses, she still is not entirely impressed by the fact that they just sailed across the ocean to give her some flowers. No, she says, you need to prove to me that you are worth your salt. And in order to do that, they have to fend off the sea monster. And once their ship is being attacked by the sea monster, Peyton finally remembers that she's actually this overpowered girl boss, and she takes a spear, jams it in the serpent's eye and mouth, and then he dies. The queen is of course very impressed, and she agrees to form an alliance with Ilya. Peyton, Kai, and what is left of their crew sail back to their kingdom, where she will receive her 3rd and final trial. And once she passes this, she'll become queen of Ilya, and all of her problems will be solved. Now, just like the first trials, they do have balls during this time as well, and since Peyton has a penchant for self-destruction, she decides to get flat out drunk, super blitz, and she decides to dance with both Kit and Kai at the same time on the dance floor, because she knows that people know that she and Kai are having a little affair, and she's like, don't worry, I'm willing to share. And she's flaunting their very entangled relationship in front of everyone. The future queen, ladies and gentlemen. Classy. Very sophisticated, very demure. Love it. So after that little spectacle, she goes back up to her room and passes out, but she's also very angry still at Blair. Now Blair, keep in mind, she was the one who won the first trials of the series, and no one even seems to remember that. There's no pomp and circumstance, there's no celebration, no parade. It was all basically overshadowed by the fact that the king was killed by an ordinary. She is still living at the palace for some strange reason. I don't know why she's allowed to be there. And Peyton has been out for blood. And then one particular night, Peyton breaks into Blair's room, and then she ends up killing Blair after a little fight. Blair, who has the ability to move objects with her mind, who had no trouble with killing Dina with a branch 3 books ago, is suddenly incapable of fending off an ordinary. I can't anymore. I'm done. So Blair dies, and she goes out a very similar way that Kai took out Braxton with a face full of fire. There were no repercussions for her actions. People just pretended like nothing happened. So what was the whole point of that? Just a random scene of vengeance. Justice was served. All right, moving on. So the third and final trial is hand-to-hand combat, of course. And Peyton has to kill her opponent in order to become the queen. And plot twist, her opponent is none other than Prince Kai himself. So Peyton realizes that Kit put Kai into the ring to basically test her loyalty to the crown. She's very upset by this, but she knows she has no other choice. And the two of them fight each other. And at one point, Prince Kai is actually about to kill her, but then he turns the tables and then coaches Peyton on how to kill him, which she does. And then, surprise, surprise, plot twist number 2, we find out that it was actually Mac the whole time, who somehow shapeshifted himself to look like Prince Kai and then fight on Prince Kai's behalf. So this whole gut-wrenching, emotional moment between Peyton and Kai was a ruse. It was all a lie. It really just goes to show how cowardly some of these writers are who don't kill off their darlings. The fact that they have to make it look like they did, but oh, just kidding. He was actually fine the whole time. He was just in his room, drugged, fast asleep, no worries. Now Mac, the snack, who does smile back now, can go live with Adina in the afterlife peacefully. So I guess there's a happy ending in here for someone. What is this book? I don't get it. So Peyton is distraught by the fact that she killed Mac because up until that point, she just found out that Adina was in love with him and he was her boyfriend for a very short period of time. Peyton was like, wow, I'm such a terrible friend. And I was like, yes, you are. Thank you for having an ounce of self-awareness. After that, the book basically just forgot that he existed. It forgot that the cook existed. And this is when Kit really starts to show his colors as the Mad King. So now that Peyton has proven the fact that she is brave, benevolent, and brutal, she will now get married to Kit. We've already exceeded our 2 plot twist quota, and now we're on to number 3. And the third plot twist is what we learned through the king's perspective, the same king who started this war on the ordinaries. And this is when he, watching his wife, his beloved queen, give birth. The queen has passed away from childbirth. She was always kept within the castle, confined and controlled by the king because he just didn't want to share her with anyone else. What a great guy. So she's been trapped in the castle, no one's really seen her, and then she dies during childbirth, and then she gives birth to an ordinary girl. Now it's important to note that the king had a wife before her and she gave birth to Kit. So different moms, same man. Can you guess who this ordinary girl was? If you guess it was Peyton, you are correct. So the king wants to dispose of the ordinary girl. Callum, who is his mind reader friend, takes pity on her and delivers her adoptive father's house. And then the king concocts his new plan with his advisor's daughter, very similar to House of Dragon, where the advisor tells him, hey, my daughter's actually expecting a baby with another man. I'm not sure who the other man was. It was never revealed to us. I thought that was going to be like plot twist number 4. It was not. So this woman is Kai's mother, the most recent queen that did eventually pass away later on in this series. And she offers up her services to the king and says, hey, let's make this story that the queen died, something tragic happened, and we have actually been together for a lot longer because we were trying to hide our affair. So the king agrees to the plot. Kai is now Prince Kai and the future enforcer, which is why the king was so willing to torture him and hurt him to train him for his new job, is because he was never really his to begin with. And then the ordinary girl is Peyton. Now Peyton finds this out in a very unceremonious way with Callum. And now Peyton comes across this information before the wedding. Now we as a reader know that Kit and Peyton are half siblings, and they're now getting married. Boy, Game of Thrones fan fiction has reared its ugly head. So Peyton comes across this information and she's very disturbed by it, to say the least, and she's very upset at the fact that she's now going to have to marry her half-brother. But she does nothing to stop the ceremony, neither does Kai, and she gets married to Kit and they share a kiss, and it's a like gentle peck on the lips, but still, with the information that we have as readers, it's still incredibly gross. I do also want to mention that before the wedding, Prince Kai and Peyton sleep together for the final time before she gets married. So personally, I don't think Kai was going to keep his word, but that's my 2 cents. This time that we learned that in the journals, the king actually was in cahoots with Callum. So Callum was actually working with the king as a mole in order to squash the rebellion from the inside and just relay information to the king. But I don't understand this strategy, because why would you allow this pest to fester and grow, become more strong and powerful, and recruit other elites into their ranks to rise up against you? What if your plan failed? You're literally putting people in danger. Your own people have died because you sat back and let the ordinary army grow. Now, I get to a certain extent of allowing Callum to recruit people and everything, but at the same time, why don't you take your bluffs, the people who can tell whether or not you're lying, and go around your village and ask people to answer one simple question: are they ordinaries or not? Why would you waste this essential manpower, your own imperial army, when you could have literally squashed the ordinary population in your kingdom? I don't know what the king was thinking. I don't know why he would allow the army to grow. And that was plot twist number 4, that Callum was actually in cahoots with the king. And plot twist number 5, we also learned that Callum and the queen were having an affair behind the king's back. And Callum is actually Peyton's father. Are we confused yet? This is what I mean by having more than 2 plot twists. You start to lose the plot. You cannot keep track of all this brand new information coming at you. Even when you grasp it, you feel like, oh no, it's going to be taken away again. Is this actually true? Is this going to be another plot twist on top of another plot twist? It's too many. So Peyton, upon learning this information, confronts Kai and Kit about it. So Kit, throughout this entire book, we've gotten a sense that he is actually sick, and we find out, plot number 6, that this whole thing was a facade. This was all a ruse, and Kit has actually been plotting on destroying ordinaries for good by releasing another plague. The flowers that they gave to the neighboring kingdom, those were plague flowers. Plot twist number 7. It was all a trap from the very beginning, because he and Callum actually knew each other this entire time. Is this plot twist number 7? I'm losing track of the numbers, guys. This is bad. This is too many. He was in cahoots with Callum, and Peyton later on confirms that Callum was never really forcing Kit to do anything. This was all Kit's doing. And so she confronts Callum about this, and he reveals that yes, he was working for the king. Yes, he has been in cahoots with him this whole time, and he's actually been working with Kit in order to squash rebellion once and for all. And then she ends up killing him, and then she and Kai go to confront Kit about what they just learned, and he confesses to the whole thing, like the cartoonishly evil supervillain Lauren Roberts has reduced him to now. He tells them that he has actually been planning on releasing the plague out into the world again, because in his sick, twisted mind, it's going to get rid of the ordinaries once and for all, and also make the elites even more powerful. And he tested the plague on himself, because I guess they just have that stuff lying around in vials still in their castle. So he somehow administers the plague to himself. I'm not sure how he does that, but he gives himself the plague to become a full avatar, I presume, and it ends up killing him in the end. And then he and Kit start to get into a fight, and they are dueling with swords. So Kit challenges Kai to a fight. Kai uses a fire poker, Kit uses a sword. And then they fight, and then at one point it's more like a choreography dance that they have been training since they were little. It's like the same thing they always do, and Kai is following along to the steps perfectly. Kit messes up on one of the steps, and then Kai stabs him through the heart. And this entire scene was very reminiscent of the movie Clue, where I felt like, hey, it was Prince Kai in the study with the fire poker. That was a general tone of that entire scene, and it just made me laugh unintentionally. And I don't think Lauren Roberts made it to be that way, but I just thought it was funny. So now the Mad King is dead. The plague has been squashed somehow, despite the fact that they were all around Kit this entire time. None of them caught on to the super infectious disease that killed nearly half their population the last time. Not sure how that's possible. So everyone is safe and sound. Prince Kai is now King Kai. There's now peace throughout the land. All the ordinaries and elites are magically now best friends. Everyone's totally fine. There's no more racism. They solved racism, and now they have a couple of kids, and they are now living happily ever after in a peaceful, happy Ilya. The end. That's the series. So things I liked about this book. At the very end, there is a scene where Kit goes to the afterlife. And this scene was a very emotional one because he is no longer plagued by the plague and his mind is clear and he realizes that what he did was bad and that the whole time, and the reason why he hated Peyton so much was because she was taking attention away from his brother. So he was jealous that Kai was no longer spending as much time with him. Dude, you can date him. He's not your brother by blood. He's your adopted brother, but you don't know that, at least not yet. And then during the scene, there are two other characters. So we have two stars in the sky that are talking to him. And it's not outright told to us, but it is implied that it's his parents. And during this time, Kit is very lonely and he's talking to them and they tell him, oh, don't worry, your family will be with you soon. What? I'm sorry, but if I was Peyton, I would not want to spend the afterlife with the guy who tried to kill me and start another genocide, a biological war, if you will. That redemption arc was insane. Like, I guess the moral of the story is that you're absolved of all your wrongdoings the minute that you die. You don't have to answer for anything. I thought it was very interesting, and it was a bit of a breath of fresh air from the rest of the book, which is so bogged down by these innocuous trials, these weird scenes where Kai was breaking into Peyton's room and she was suddenly aroused by that. I have questions. I will say one thing about the trials is that they actually meant something a little bit more than the previous ones were. There was more at stake with them, even though we all knew what was going to happen at the very end of it. But I did like the fact that Peyton would have to prove herself personally to become the queen. I did like the catacomb scene. I liked the scene of her fighting off the sea monster. I did like Kit's original plan before the 10 different plot twists that we had, where he was going to marry her to form an alliance. That was the only intelligent thing anyone in the series had done up until that point. Poor Kit. I really liked him before he went all crazy. Now we get to the parts that I did not like. First of all, I hate the brother love triangle trope that I've been seeing in a lot of books. It's just really gross. It feels like soft incest, and I just don't like it because it always creates awkward situations, and I don't know how people can rectify that trope because when you think about it for long enough, weird, don't you think? I didn't like the incest story. I thought that was weird. Lauren Roberts was just trying to get Kit out of the picture, turning him into the Mad King, giving him the plague, and killing him off. That's all a character assassination you need. But they had to make Peyton royal and have some claim to the throne somehow. So we just had to throw that in there, which is still really gross. I don't know why we need this in a story. Hasn't Cassandra Clare already tortured us enough with this in the Mortal Instrument series? I don't get what it is with people in incest nowadays. It's finding its way into a lot of literature. I will not stand for it. I wish Kai wasn't so dramatic. He was always like, oh, I love Peyton. She is everything. She is my soul. She is my heart. And I just could not take him seriously because he was a moody, broody bad boy and such a martyr for love. It was so sickening. Dude, get over yourself.
Just because you put syrup on something don't make it pancakes.
Take it down like 2 notches. You're out of here. I need you out of here. And also, I did not like the fact that these characters were so static. What I mean by that is static versus dynamic. So static characters are characters that don't change at all throughout the entire series. Dynamic are the ones that do change. For better, for worse. And Peyton has always been the same person. Throughout this entire series, she has always acted the same, treated people the same, thought the same. Nothing about her perspective ever really changed. Kai's changed a little, and Kit changed for the worse. I don't like characters that don't change because it makes it a very boring read. I know Lauren Roberts is slightly capable of good character development work, but she just lacks the motivation to commit because people care more about the romance than what's actually going on internally inside of her characters' heads. I also didn't like the multiple plot twists at the end. There were too many. I don't know why we needed to establish Callum as Peyton's real father, which also didn't make her heir to the throne. Neither her nor Kai now have any claim on the throne. It's just all based on lies. I guess it's because they're the only people left to do the job. Jax completely disappeared. I do not know where he is. I don't think Lauren Roberts knows either. So many characters were just from the previous books, and honestly, I don't think I even noticed until I got to the very end of the story, which is sad. I didn't like the fact that Kit and Callum have been working together for years. I thought that was really weird, and even made the Kit scenes in the Reckless book even more obsolete because why would you make us believe this character was thinking this when he was really thinking this the entire time? I don't know if she was trying to go for an unreliable narrator bit, but that's just outright lying. So you can have a super big plot twist at the end in the name of shock value. And that's not very good writing. I really think that Roberts set herself up for failure there because she could have just had a much simpler ending where our characters still ended up where they needed to end up, and that would have been fine. Oh, and also Peyton's psychic abilities, the ones that she's been pretending to have this entire time, are basically forgotten. She only had to prove them once during one of the council meetings, and then they just never used them ever again. They called them observation skills, and I was just thinking of the whole time, like, why don't you just make her hyper to explain why she's so overpowered all the time, or why she can really pass off as a psychic. And also, like I mentioned before, I didn't like the fact that Peyton didn't have any autonomy in her own story. She's the main character, and she doesn't make make any of the decisions in this story that are relevant to the plot at all. They're all made for her. Kit proposed. She was forced to go into the trials in the first book. The second book, she was exiled to Dorne. In the third book, she was forced to prove herself in the trials to marry Kit. She never really makes any decisions. Any decisions that she does make are very small, or they're very poor decisions that could potentially get her in even more trouble. I also don't like how Kai is essentially treated like a sex object either, because the only thing that is really redeemable about him is the fact that he's attractive, and I also don't like how he treats her like a possession, and he's entitled to her at all times, even though she's engaged to be married to his brother. I also hate the justification behind the cheating trope. Whenever a character is cheating on their significant other with their real soulmate, it's fine. We can dismiss it because, oh, these people are really meant to be, and they are justified in their actions. I hate it when authors pull that in a story. It's lazy, and it doesn't make me want to root for these characters at all, or their love story. So those were the things I didn't like about Fearless specifically. Now let's talk about weird trends that I noticed throughout this entire series. In every single one of her books, she always referenced the other book titles in the series. So she would always say, oh, I'm so powerless. Oh, I feel so powerful. All those titles were repeatedly mentioned throughout the entire series, and once you noticed, it got really distracting. It was also very strange that they referenced the plagues. They say, oh, my plagues. I don't understand why you would continue to reference or think something that killed people. I get why the elites would say that, but even then, some of their friends and family die from the plagues. I don't know why they would revere it in that way. I guess it's the only religion or faith system they have set up in this book, even though they do mention God a couple times and there's an afterlife. I'm just still not entirely sure. I just thought that was very strange colloquialism for them to have. I also didn't like the names for any of the superpowers. They were all lazy, weird, derivative, and at one point lifted from actual characters in real life superhero comic books and movies. I did not appreciate that. I don't know why Marvel and DC are not breathing down her neck right now. Maybe just because Flash and Blink are technically common nouns as well. I also didn't like the way that she wrote a lot of these superpowers. It was just lazy. It wasn't very creative. They didn't use them in any interesting or fun ways. Like, why wasn't Kai changing the temperature of a room with his heat powers? Why wasn't he using his water powers to like drown people? That kind of stuff would be so interesting to really delve into those fastidious details and find new creative ways to explore, hey, how can we make this person even more powerful, show their intelligence and their dexterity with their own powers? And here they're used in very basic, obvious ways that just aren't very imaginative. Or even worse, they don't use their powers at all, which is very frustrating. Like, Kit and Adina don't really use their powers, even though it would incredibly help them in times of need. I don't get why Kit didn't want to fight his brother with his powers. I don't get why Adina wouldn't use her powers to save her own life. Again, these people have terrible survival skills. I guess they just lost the will to live at this point. Oh, and one more thing. Someone else pointed this out in another video, but there are characters called transfers who can transfer power into objects that they can use. So why haven't the rebel people gotten their hands on a transfer, asked them to give them superpowers through like a bracelet or like a tie or glasses? Why were they not doing this? Everyone in this book is just setting themselves up for failure, and it's irritating. That's what I mean by the lazy storytelling surrounding the superpowers. They're not utilized in interesting or new ways. Not to mention, they're not even used in an intelligent way. Why give these people powers at all? They are so useless and underutilized. I also forgot to mention this, but whenever there is a trial, it is introduced with a terrible poem that doesn't even rhyme. Also, the world building is just incredibly lazy because Lauren Roberts basically built this book on the foundation of other books before it. So it just feels like she expects the reader to do all the heavy lifting for her. The onus is on us to fill in the blanks with the world building, so that way she doesn't have to do any of the work to actually inform us what this world is like. Don't force your reader to do your job for you. That doesn't make you a very good writer, in my opinion. Also, the characters' features, like their eyes are repeated over and over again, becomes very redundant. Kai will not shut up about her forget-me-not blue eyes, and that's why he always gives her forget-me-nots throughout the story. It just honestly felt like Lauren Roberts was just wasting our time, or she just ran out of things to say about her characters, so she just threw in things that she's mentioned before. Believe it or not, once you mention things 1 or 2 times, people will catch on. You don't need to repeat it 10 times within the same book. It's also funny to me that Peyton is supposedly this excellent fighter who uses things like bows, arrows, and knives in her fight, and there's also throwing stars in this world, by the way, but she doesn't use other kind of weapons like poison. Like I mentioned before, the alliteration in these books are just awful. If you want examples, I do read some passages in my previous Powerless video just to illustrate that to you, but I just can't read that again. It's too painful. I can't put myself through it again. fan. Go check it out if you're interested, but just let me tell you, it just felt like Lauren Roberts was overcompensating for the fact that she is a novice author, and she just wanted to impress people, but it comes across as very try-hard and pretentious. Not to mention it makes it very difficult to read any of the passages out loud, because you're basically reciting tongue twisters. Oh, and speaking of world building, apparently in this world they have a power grid. Why? And also how? They have electricity, they don't have a radio, they don't have phones. Do you know how many issues can be alleviated with this little bit of technology? What is happening? They still use mail, but they don't have a printing press. And we never talk about the music. A record player is mentioned, but we never talk about the kind of music that they listen to. We never get introduced to lyrics. We don't really see them dancing to the record player. We see them dancing at the ball where there's a band, nothing else. And they also should have Morse code, come to think of it. Oh, and they do have indoor plumbing though, so I guess that was something someone established some time ago. No outhouses for them. Also, the series was very redundant. There was a lot of repetition going on. I just felt like Lauren Roberts was running out of things to say and just trying to fill up space. She would say, within the same sentence, furious and frustrated, his icy eyes were like icicles. Mention ocean eyes over and over again. We get it. We don't need to be reminded. I'm gonna meet my watery death. I'm gonna meet my sandy death. I'm gonna meet my fiery death, reminding us that she is powerless and ordinary, like Babe, we know is in the title. You don't need to spoon feed it to us every single time. She reminds us that Kai is a killer, even though up until Fearless, he hasn't killed a single person on the page. We are just told that he's killed people in the past, and that's it. Oh, also the words confined and trapped were used right next to each other. It means the same thing. My goodness. It's almost like Lauren Roberts was showing off the fact that she finally figured out how to use a thesaurus. Babe, just use one of those words, and you get your point across and you're fine. So in conclusion, I gave this series overall a 1.5 out of 5 stars. It was redundant. I would not recommend. In conclusion to the overall question of whether or not Lauren Roberts is indeed a plagiarizer, allegedly, I wouldn't say in the sense that she lifted direct scenes word for word from other books and put them in her story. I won't say that. I'm just saying I noticed a trend. She did seem to glean a lot of inspiration from these other stories. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it makes her an outright plagiarizer, but I would not be surprised if someone were to copyright claim her at any point for being a little too similar. But this kind of writing and books like this really dissuade me from not only wanting to read books in this genre, but also read other books by this author. I will not be supporting her in the future because it still just gives me a sick twist in my stomach that authors like this, who write on the coattails of other people's work, incite an entire army of fans to blame other authors for plagiarism. I'm not accusing her of it. It just doesn't make me want to read any more of her books. So I definitely will not be exploring those in the future. But thanks you guys for those of you who stayed until the very end. Make sure to leave a little sword emoji in the comments down below. Let me know what you thought of Powerless. Let me know what you think about Lauren Roberts. What do you think about plagiarism? Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Don't forget to keep reading. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.